This week, a Syracuse University grad is releasing a book about his time with the World Wrestling Entertainment. He's not a wrestler, he's a writer. Brian Gewirtz was the head writer during some of the company's most popular events, and now he's got a book out called There's Just One Problem. He talked with a fellow SU alum and wrestling fan, our own Sam Carter.
Brian, first of all, thank you so much for joining Good Day Rochester today. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Happy to be here.
Brian, you have a new book out right now. I've listened to the first two chapters already. You don't do the audio narration, which is interesting to me, but I've listened to the first two chapters already, and a lot of it's kind of a fish out of water story. The book is called The One Problem Is, or There's One Problem. Tell me about the book and tell me about the process of writing it.
Yeah, well, look, it'll be evident relatively shortly why I didn't do the audio version for the book. There's much clearer, smoother sounding people to be able to do that. But yeah, I mean, I was at WWE for 16 years, 12 of them full-time, 52 weeks a year, and accumulated just a lot of stories. And this was one of those things where in the back of my mind when I was at WWE, because I had come from like the sitcom writing world, I had written on 3 shows prior to joining that, you know, it was always in the back of my mind, like, am I making the right decision? Am I doing this? Is this like a bad career move? Is it, you know, going to be detrimental? And, you know, it turned out it was a great career move and personal move as far as, you know, all the people I met and all the relationships that got fostered and just so much that I learned. But when it was over, I definitely wanted to take that experience and, you know, parlay it or express it somehow. You know, a lot of people are doing podcasts and they're great at it. I don't have like the greatest memory in the world about stuff that I've forgotten about, if that makes sense. The stuff I remember really well, but the other stuff I don't really remember very well. So I just thought, and especially when, you know, unfortunately, you know, when the pandemic hit and everything, that I had all this time and, you know, just sitting in my apartment, with nothing but your thoughts, you know, that it would be that would be like a good time. Like even, you know, as I said to myself, even if nobody ever reads this but me, you know, I think it would be good. I think it would be therapeutic to get all these stories that I've told over the years and that some that I didn't down on paper and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, the eras in which you worked in WWE, if you don't know wrestling, you probably won't understand this, but the Attitude Era, the Ruthless Aggression era, and then even into kind of the PG era, which we're now kind of leaving and getting out of for reasons we won't get into. But you know, you had such a broad career in the sports entertainment industry. But as you alluded to earlier, you came from kind of a traditional entertainment writing background. Talk to me about the transition from that to sports entertainment, pro wrestling, if you will, and how different or how similar those two things are.
It's really different. And it's different mainly from just a pure lifestyle standpoint, because no show in the world, I don't think, you know, tours and, you know, 200 miles in between cities, you know, between Raw and SmackDown, which we would, you know, was live now, but we would tape on Tuesdays that would air Thursdays and Fridays. And if there was a pay-per-view on Sunday, then it's really quite a trip because you're doing 3 cities and 3 nights, you know, upwards of 200 miles between all the cities and everything. And there's just like so much content, you know, other shows have repeats or they have their season finale and, you know, then you have literally months and just the process in general, as you guys know, you know, if you're writing, like I came from sitcoms, both multicam in front of a studio audience and single cam, which would be, you know, that's how we do Young Rock now, where the scripts are written well ahead of time. And then, you know, you have literally weeks to shoot something. And in a multicam, you know, on the Paramount stage where we were shooting it, you have, again, you know, the whole week to fine tune the script, and you have weeks previously to write it and write the outline and write the first draft and put it together and get notes and all that type of thing. And in WWE, it's really, you could prepare as much as possible, but it's really like seat of your pants live show that night. You know, I always kind of paraphrase the Tina Fey quote about Saturday Night Live, which, was the show doesn't go on the air because it's ready. The show goes on the air because it's 11:30. It's the same thing with WWE sometimes. The show goes on the air because we're live. We're live, pal, at 8 o'clock on Mondays and Fridays. So, yeah, that's like the biggest shock to the system is just like the sheer amount of work that needs to be done, the travel, the camaraderie or lack of camaraderie in my case at the beginning with the wrestlers. It's just like and a cast too, the wrestlers, it's 40 50 people that all want to be spotlighted, and rightfully so, and all want to have that precious TV taping time, as one of the wrestlers called it back in the day. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
And we've got a lot more with Sam and that interview with Brian coming up after 8. Brian will talk about getting to know The Rock. We will be right back. All right, now on to our Sam Carter with his conversation with writer Brian Gewirtz. Gewirtz is an SU grad who has written a book about his time as the head writer of the WWE. And in that time, he made a very big connection. He is now the executive producer of the show Young Rock. Here's more of that conversation with our Sam Carter.
What I liken it to, the little I know of that actual business, is it seems to me like it's like the Harlem Globetrotters and Days of Our Lives had a baby, in that it's every day, but you're traveling. Do you know what I mean? And it's a huge show. Now, when you were head writer for WWE for a number of years, you made a lot of really amazing connections. One of those connections was to potentially the world's most famous former WWE superstar, The Rock. You now work for The Rock, his production company, and you work as a producer on Young Rock. Talk to me about how accurate those stories are and how much input the man himself actually has into that show.
Yeah, well, look, every season, we're lucky to be in our 3rd season now. Every season starts with a bunch of the producers, including Natasha Khan and Jeff Chang, the showrunners, us all sitting down with Dwayne in person. It hasn't been on Zoom yet, even in this era. It's always been in person. And Dwayne just telling us stories about his youth, telling us stories about his dad, his mom, his grandma, his grandfather, stories that he experienced firsthand, stories that have been passed down to him through, his family. And just like, just an all-day story session. And Dwayne will always, he's hands-on in everything he does. So he'll get the outlines. He'll chime in, if like, yeah, guys, we got to fix this because this just isn't right, and it's an entertainment show. It's not a documentary. So yeah, there'll be, a select vocal amount of people with scorecards at home going, wait a second, Randy Savage and Andre the Giant weren't in Hawaii in 1982. Who do I write to? Where's the hotline I can call?
Wrestling fans getting overly emotional about accuracy? Yeah. Get out of here.
Never thought it. Yeah, exactly.
Stop it. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. But the truth is, Leah Maivia, Dwayne's grandmother, first female promoter in the United States, had a great relationship with Vince McMahon, both junior and senior. And, WWE, WWF at the time, did something that they didn't really do with anyone else. They allowed their wrestlers to go down to Hawaii and do the shows there, just out of respect to Peter Maivia and Leah. And so we were able to, we want to have recognizable characters. We want, there to be an instant kind of like nostalgia factor for the favorite stars from the 80s, now in the 90s, with Dwayne Uli portraying Dwayne in his 20s, to be able to see all these guys. So, did Andre the Giant order, this specific thing at a diner, with Iron Sheik sitting, across the table from him? I don't know, maybe not. But it's all like based on, true stories, and everything. All the major stories are based in reality. They're all based on these stories that Dwayne has told us. Some of them, again, that he's told before. Some of them that I'm sitting there, I've known him for 23 years and was like, I never knew that. That's amazing. So it's really, really cool.
I want to get back to the book for a second because I'm reading just through listening to just the first couple of chapters of it. You are telling your version, your truth about these events, and it doesn't always make everybody look great. I'm thinking of the wrestler's court with the person whose tights you mentioned. I'm nervous they would attack me if they ever saw me, so I won't mention the name. But are you nervous about anybody reading your account of these events?
I'm not really. I hope not, because first of all, like you said, I'm not trying to bury anybody. I'm trying to put a truthful, fun, telling of these stories that happened to me. And, I'm in a, and you'll see, as you get through the book, I have a great relationship with almost pretty much like 98% of all these guys and women now. And I had a pretty good relationship with some back then. Some, it was a little testy. And as you saw in the, hopefully the audiobook, stays true to the written, that some of the words, I redacted, out of consideration for, the people now and everything. But that's, kind of like, that's what it was, the Wild West back then. It was much, much more, unpredictable backstage environment, let's say. And yeah, I get along in a really, it's one of the things I'm most proud of, actually, is the fact that I could see some of these guys who I would be butting heads with in 2001, 2002, and genuinely be happy to see them, and hopefully vice versa. We DM with each other on Twitter. We wish each other happy holidays and everything. It's nice that it comes full circle, and if, hopefully, there's that fine line between being able to tell the truth and being able to, be wanting to have everything out there. Hopefully, there's no heat or anything like that afterwards, because, everyone knows, the place where it's coming from. It's not coming from an angry or I'll show this person type of place.
Now to the final part of our Sam Carter's interview with SU alum Brian Gewirtz. Brian is a former head writer for the WWE and has written a book about his time there and some life lessons that he learned.
The era you worked in is remembered as kind of a second golden era of wrestling. The 80s happened, and then the kind of 90s Attitude Era, Ruthless Aggression era happened. What's your take on the current product of both WWE and its competitor AEW?
I don't watch a ton of AEW. I watch a lot of it, like a lot of people consume it, on scrolling through Twitter and YouTube and that kind of thing, even though I have a lot of friends there. And WWE is the same deal, really. Like, I'm not able to watch it. And a lot of people, it's why, like, the shift in ratings, when people look at ratings compared to Attitude Era and everything, the whole television landscape, what was a great rating even just 5 years ago, would be an astronomical rating now, and all that. But I consume the product not as I used to, and like some of the things I like, sometimes it's a little too wrestling centric for me, for my tastes. Sometimes I wish there was more kind of like backstage shenanigans, storylines, whether entertainment, comedy, if done right, can be a great help to get characters over, you get more popular and connect with the audience. But there's also, I think that the recent, shows that I've seen tend to be going in that direction, because I know all the performers can handle it. I know a lot of the performers from when I worked there. Some of them I've met more recently, and I know they're all chomping at the bit to do, backstage vignettes, off-site vignettes, get involved in storylines. They all have the talent for it. They all have the capacity for it and the hunger for it. And you need to have that balance, in my opinion, to have all of it, including, great matches. What's one of, the WWE philosophy was always like, you can have a great match, this guy versus this guy, or this woman versus this woman. But if you don't know them as characters and don't really care about them, then it's not going to really mean all that much. It's going to mean something to an extent, but not all that it could be, unless you really become invested in them and want to see someone win and someone lose. So all of that is about character building and make sure those personas are very, very much, defined, whether it's a good guy, bad guy, babyface or heel. And it does seem, for whatever reason, you could point to, the shift with Triple H in charge now, or maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's very, very calculated, but it seems to be shifting in that direction, and it's a great thing to see. It wasn't like it was just nothing but nonstop matches for the past 5 years or anything like that. They've definitely had, they have a lot of writers, they have a lot of talented writers. But anytime you kind of shift and have like this perfect blend and perfect balance, for me as a fan, that's my favorite version.
Last thing from me, and in the blurb for your book, you talk about, and I'm gonna mess up the line here, so I apologize. You talk about when you're terrified, you need to be fearless, and I imagine what you mean by that is going from something that you knew and were probably very comfortable with to in the WWE, something you were probably a fan of but had no idea about. Talk about that idea in the book and also in life, because I think it's an important thing.
Oh, totally. And then that's a line that I paraphrased from Roddy Piper, who was, Rowdy Piper, the late Rowdy Piper, who was my hero growing up. I had his poster in my bedroom. I had all the action figures and LJN dolls and posters and everything. The VHS, Rowdy Piper's greatest hits, I wore it out. You too?
Yeah, I love Rowdy.
Yeah.
Nobody could get heat like Rowdy Piper. Rowdy Piper, yeah. It was a good day for Rowdy Piper when somebody took a swipe at him with a switchblade. Like that was, he wanted you to hate him so much. And I've always respected that about him.
Yeah. And, when I got to know Roddy, I was fortunate enough to work with him. And that was one of his philosophies that I thought was like really, really smart, was like, when you're so full of fear, you just got to put it aside and just become fearless and just do it. And it's not like, all of a sudden, I'm like Superman or anything back there, but it's just like putting, like you'll have time to reflect and regret and be afraid later. Right now there's a show to do. So you got to put that aside and just plow forward and just do it. It was a lesson my uncle imparted on me, when I was writing on sitcoms, because he was the showrunner on one of the sitcoms I worked on. It was always a dream of mine to work with him. And, I would be very nervous and very tentative in pitching jokes, to the point where he had to pull me aside and say, listen, you're my nephew and everything, but if you don't start stepping up, this isn't going to last. So that was like a big time wake up call. So that was partly, between seeing Roddy live it every day. It was just one of those things where you just got to and I think it applies not just to WWE, but it applies to pretty much everything in both work and non-work situations. Sometimes you just got to not live in your head and put all your natural fears and just the fact that I'm talking to you on this thing, which is something, throughout my life, I would never have ever envisioned for me, because, I lived for most of almost all my WWE tenure, behind the camera and not even thinking about, doing an on-screen interview. That would be insane, much less promoting a book. So sometimes you just got to put your fears aside. A lot of times you got to do that and just face the music and do what you need to do.
Guys, the book is called There's Only One Problem. There's Just One Problem. I have it on Audible because I'm what they call a bad reader. But you can catch it at bookstores right now. It is it's hysterical. It's really interesting. And if you ever want an inside look at how someone with very little working knowledge of the wrestling industry kind of makes their mark, this is it. It is an awesome book. You need to check it out. I don't say that all the time. You need to check it out. His name is Brian Gewirtz. He has been an awesome guest. I really appreciate your time this morning, man.
Sam, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Really
huge fan of your work. Seriously, 5-second pose is one of my favorite things ever, all time.
Thank you.
You're welcome, buddy.